we encourage you to reach out locally, wherever local is for you, and do what we call heart local ag. Try to source some, most, all, as much as you possibly can of your own food directly from farmers, ranchers, and producers in your area, wherever local is for you. You get wholesome food, you know where it came from, you can talk to the person that you source it from, find out how they produce it. There's no better feeling than being 100% confident that what you're eating is something you want to consume. So we do want to get to the topic at hand here, getting ready for meat chickens. So you can see this is one of our sons, one of our 3 sons up here on the ladder. We're getting ready for chickens. What we're doing is setting up a brooder space for 225 meat chickens. So we've done a couple other videos in this series showing you getting the feeders and waters ready. So there's the baby bird waters, the trays that go with them right here, the baby bird feeders, the adult bird feeders, the adult bird waters. But we showed y'all one step you want to start with when you're going to get meat chickens, getting ready for any kind of baby chickens, is have your feeders and waters that are the size for day-old chicks and have them clean, ready to use, and ready to go. The other thing was having your feed on site for them. We talked about that in a video. And now we're to this step, having a safe space to start them in. So that's what we're doing here. We have kind of an added bonus here of being able to show y'all a brooder space that was already set up. This was actually kind of an impromptu set of chickens that we started just about 5 days ago. We didn't expect to get all of the yellow fluffy chickens. Those are actually meat birds as well. So that's the kind that we're getting ready for over there in that brooder space. Howdy, Wade.
Where do you want this at?
Thanks for your help, man. Well, we want to put, so Wade just asked me where do I want this at. So Wade, what we're trying to accomplish there is we want 8 heat lamps like these centered or kind of symmetrically placed evenly throughout that brooder space. So I'm going to pause the recording. Wade and I are going to figure out some placement, but that's what we're trying to accomplish here is 8 heat lamps suspended on chains that we can run electric cords to various places. Like there's a set of 4 can go there. So Wade's got a couple started there. So Wade, that looks pretty good. I don't know if we can actually do 4 sets of those across there. That would be great if we could. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. We've got basically a short wall. We call this a short wall, and we call this a walk-in brooder. This works for us. It's not going to be necessary for every situation. We're planning on starting 225 birds in this space. If you're starting 10 birds, you aren't going to need this setup. You might want a big water trough, like a stock tank that you can get at a feed supply store. But we're going to want 225 birds here. So we want a safe place to put them where they're somewhat contained. They don't need tons of room when they're little. We will have to do some expansion as they grow. And then we want to put targeted warmth in there because they definitely want an ambient temperature of about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. We're in Southeast Ohio. The only way we're going to accomplish that is some targeted warmth. Okay, so actually what we decided here is instead of 8 heat lamps, we're going to do 9 because we're going to do 3 sets of 3 hanging down, placed evenly over this brooder space for the chicks that we're going to move in. But this is a really important step in getting ready for chicks. Having a place to put them and being certain that you can keep some ambient temperature comfort to them. So for meat birds, space-wise, how much room do you need in the brooder? Well, honestly, you don't need a lot of room in the beginning, but they grow quickly. So for meat birds, if you give them a small space to start with, which I do recommend, and my family would say that's the way to go. You want to keep them close to their resources of their food and water. You want to keep them close to where you are keeping the ambient conditions around 95 degrees Fahrenheit for them their first week, days 1 through about day 7. So you want them in a relatively small space for that amount of time. But with meat birds, they are going to grow so fast that when we start them in that small space, we need to be prepared right at the beginning, right from day one, for an expansion, probably around day 10. And when we expand the room for them around day 10, if we only, say we only double the room that we're giving them floor space wise, then we need to be prepared to double it again, probably out at about day 21 or so, and give them lots of room. For us, on our production system, when we work with meat birds, they're always Cornish rock cross meat chickens, and we always prefer a 42-day production, meaning we're going to raise them for 6 weeks. Day 1 to day 42, ideally, we have their processing appointment to have them processed into poultry, butchered, processed into poultry. We ideally have that set up for day 42. Here's what I can tell you on day 42 that we want floor space wise for meat birds. And we are talking about a system where they are started, grown, and finished inside the barn. We're going to open up the doors of the barn. We have doors on every side of this building, so it's a totally open air feeling inside the barn for the birds, but the birds are kept inside the barn, and that is totally for their protection from predators, and from also for their protection from the weather elements, particularly sun and rain. For meat birds, that's really, really important. So what I can tell you floor space wise for meat birds that we want, our model is built on 2 square foot per bird in the flock at finish. So if we were going to raise 400 meat birds, we want 800 square foot to expand into as they grow. We know that at finish on day 42, we want to make sure that they have ample room in their floor space, and our experience has shown us that if we can guarantee 2 square foot per bird that's in the flock, from start grow to finish, that's going to give us enough room to raise them, keep the space clean enough and hygienic enough, and keep them comfortable enough that we can successfully finish them for poultry. So that's what I would say space wise. If you're looking at starting meat chicks, you don't need as much room to start them as you need to finish them, but when you start them, you need to have in mind we want to have a space that allows 2 square foot per bird that's in the flock that we can grow them into over time. Now, you can also, another note on that, you could start them, say, in a stock tank in your garage that's kept a pretty semi-comfortable temperature. You might still have to add a heat lamp, and you could start them in a stock tank or in stock tanks and set that up as a brooder space for chicks, and then move them into a bigger space like you might have in a barn or a building. But on our production system, what we found over time is that when we have to move birds from one building to another, it does create a stress element. And one of the components, cornerstones of our production system is we're trying to reduce and eliminate stress throughout production. So anytime we can do something that takes a stress factor away and doesn't introduce it into our flock, we're going to do that. So we figured out when we started raising these meat birds, this is our 5th year doing this. We've always had chickens, we've always had livestock, we have an agriculture background, but meat birds are really specialized, and we started doing this about 5 years ago. We figured out in the first year, if we can start those birds inside of the space that we want to grow and finish them in and not have to move them from a building to another building, they just really do a lot better. So that's why we use this setup, where this barn was actually designed for how we want to raise the meat birds here, and we made it big enough that we can have the amount of birds we want in there at finish, and they can have enough room, so we could max out at 450 birds here in a flock at a time. And we wanted to be able to build a little brooder inside the building, start them, grow them, and finish them right in here without ever having to move them between buildings. So that's what we're doing. So I can see Wade has made a lot of progress right here on getting these chains suspended. So he actually has, so I don't know if y'all can see them, but 3 chains suspended in a row here. He's got the row of 3 here. We're going to do one more row of 3 about there where he's working. You actually can see one hanging there. So so we like to build this walk-in brooder right inside the building, set it up with walls and the targeted warmth that we need. And then what we'll do is, as these birds grow, we'll be able to build a different wall configuration, and just like maybe in this case, maybe we would extend this short wall on out to that perimeter wall, and then we would just take this piece down, and we'd install more lamps here, and we'd just let that flock just move over and fill that whole space, and they'll still have their original space plus their new space. So regardless of the flock size, that's basically the tactic we use in this building. We basically set up the walk-in brooder space with the plans that those birds are going to need 2 expansions as they grow to accommodate the start phase. The first phase, the brooder, accommodates the start phase. The first expansion will accommodate the growing phase of the bird's development, and the last expansion will accommodate the finish stage of the bird's development. So basically, where we're starting these 225 birds here in that space, over 6 weeks time, we're going to end up expanding to where those birds basically are going to have a 15-foot by 30-foot section of this building to finish in. That's a great example of how we want to see chicks using the heat lamps. Wanted to show you all that while we have the visual to look at. They're leaving the center where we see the beam of light and where the most heat is emitted. They're leaving that open and basically forming a ring around it, somewhat like this. That's exactly how we want to see chicks interact with these lights. And we want it set up so that we can keep them in use, but adjust the lights as needed. Because basically, chicks, you want to start out 95 degrees Fahrenheit, as close as possible, ambient temperature. And then you can plan on that ambient temperature that they want decreasing about 5 degrees weekly down to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that's where we want to leave it. And with meat birds, since we're only keeping them in production about 6 weeks, that temperature range going from 95 degrees down to about 70 degrees, that works out just about right time-wise. If we're dropping each week, we might finish them in ambient condition about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And then with your egg production chicks, like in this group, all the yellow fluffed ones are meat birds. All the darker fluffed ones are some different egg production breeds. Basically, we're going to treat them the same as meat birds their first 6 weeks, and then as they mature past that and they start to feather in better, when they get well feathered in and temperatures are mild outdoors, they can be able to get outdoors in the natural ambient conditions of whatever the climate is at that time. But floor space wise, starting birds, this gives you a great visual. This is about 96 chicks in here. They have a little under 10 foot by 10 foot, and you can see they have plenty of room. So actually this size is going to accommodate some growth in these birds. They're going to be able to stay in here probably at least 2 to 3 weeks, and then this group that's going to move into this brooder is going to be a little over double this amount of birds. We're going to have 225 go into here. So we hope that they'll stay in there hopefully about 2 weeks before we have to do an expansion and maybe give them the rest of that into the building. But also lamp wise, what kind of ratio heat lamp wise on your birds? Even looking at this visual reference, it's a good kind of ratio to say one heat lamp could handle 25 chicks. Now, I've seen different numbers that have said one heat lamp can handle more chicks than that, but in real life, putting it into practice, our experience in week 1, day 1 to day 7, is like one heat lamp per 25 chicks is a pretty good ratio. So if you're going to have 25 or less chicks, one heat lamp should do it. If you're going to have 50 chicks, I would go with 2 heat lamps. And one thing we try to do, and that's why we're doing the 9 heat lamps placed evenly throughout that pen. One thing we try to do with those heat lamps, if you're using multiples, is position them close enough that the heat emitted off of them kind of meets in the middle, and position your resources of your feeders and waters within that targeted warmth area. We call it a blanket of warmth, because here's the thing about chicks, And there's a great visual. That's exactly how we want chicks using a heat lamp. But here's the thing you got to know about chicks. Baby chicks prioritize warmth. They need to eat, they need to drink, but if they have to choose and they have food and water in one place and heat in another place, they're going to go choose the warmth. They need to be the temperature they want to be, and they are going to prioritize it. And that is why even most hatcheries will recommend heat lamps instead of brooder plates, because quite frequently what I've read of other people's experiences with brooder plates and chicks, when you use a brooder plate, you can't necessarily position their food and water underneath it. And if they get in ambient conditions where they have to choose between staying warm or going to eat and drink, they'll actually choose to stay warm and stay under the brooder. And we've noticed the same thing with raising chicks under heat lamps. If we pulled all those feeders and waters like over to the outside and put them over here and out there and kept this area under the heat lamps free of the food and water, when it gets cold at night, instead of going to eat when they have an appetite or going to get a drink of water, they would just stay under the heat lamps. So we learned a long time ago, we've got to position their resources, their food and their water, in that same blanket of warmth where we're keeping them comfortable with ambient temperature. So that's the lowdown on that step of getting ready for chicks. We use this kind of walk-in brooder with the short wall inside our meat bird barn because of the number of chicks that we're starting. If you're starting a smaller amount of chicks, you can do it in a whole different setup, a whole different scale. If y'all are starting chickens, let us know in comments what kind of chickens, how many chickens, and a little bit of a description of what is your setup like for starting your chicks. We can't wait to hear your stories and your experience. And so the next steps after this will be getting bedding and putting down in that brooder. So we'll do a video on that here in the next few days. And before we wrap this one up, we're just going to go down and take a look at the chicken coop builds that are for our egg production chickens, give y'all a peek at that. And there's some of the material for that. And before we leave this barn, thought we would mention the guys did staple up some feed sacks up there on the wall. And they did that because we had a little bit of air, wind drafting in through the gaps between the boards on the barn. So that helped a little too in this brooder space for these chicks. If we need to do that over here, we can do that right on the doors themselves, but I honestly don't think we'll have to, because it's going to be a little warmer for this group moving in than it was for this group. So a little bit of a bonus here, finish up with a peek at the chicken coop builds. So we're building some hen houses for our egg production chickens. So kind of the short story on each of those coops, designed here, built by the family. Did have to buy most of the materials, had a few things that we had on hand that could be repurposed for some materials, some roof metal, one of the doors, but for the most part had to buy everything. So can tell you cost and man hours on making those. Material cost about $1,000 per building, man hours about 40 individual man hours per building on making these little 8-foot by 8-foot coops. So about 64 square foot each. We're finding that like 16 hens is pretty comfortable in each. They really only have to be in the coop overnight, and they're able to come out during the daytime. This project has a lot more steps involved in it, because ultimately we want to put fencing here that's really a complete enclosure and make a few little paddocks where we can use a little bit of a rotation philosophy for the hens in the paddocks and try to keep some vegetation on the ground for them, but ultimately trying to move our egg production hens out of the building they're in now and get them all down here, 3 little groups of up to 20 each, and that's where we're gonna top off and max out our egg production chickens. So some of them are inside the hen house right there, but they actually are really doing well. We've just got this one hen house that's being occupied currently, one group of hens in there. The hens are doing really well in it, and this group of hens is actually able to free range in the way it's set up right now, but we will be putting some fencing up for them with these. you actually can see some of the construction there. some of the hens checking out the future hen houses. And it is really a lot of fun to see these hens down here because they actually go down into the stream. They go over into the woods. How's it coming, Jared? We're doing just a little bit of recording on these. Check in progress. How's it going?
Good.
I love the corner trim. I'm just getting your back right there. So this is a new feature. We upgraded from the first hen house that we built like this, from the original design. Jared got the drip edge he wanted for this and the corner trim. So would you call it galvalume on that? So that's really looking nice. So at some point we'll paint these panels. We were going to paint them a dark color, but we may wait and see. We may need to end up painting them a lighter color. But anyway, so they're putting some trim on this one. Is the roof going to get on this one today?
Well, I hope so.
Okay.
But
Okay. What?
We don't have a whole lot to do. We got the doors hung. Doors hung.
Oh, good.
Owen's going to put the lights on.
Yeah.
And so we just got to do
Hey,
that
Owen.
in and the corners. So get the roof on, the soffit, it can come later.
Okay.
But at least if we can get the roof on,
Okay.
we can
And then
check the hens in here.
at the bottom, will you remind me, we just fill those gaps with boards. Fill those in
Yeah.
with boards, right?
Yeah.
Because these are not, the poles are not set in the ground. They are not permanent buildings. And they would actually be able to be moved, relocated, sold. so they're not permanent structures because they aren't setting the posts in the ground, but they're built on site and leveled up on site. And then the guys we'll show you on this one, they'll just fill the gaps with a board at the bottom, and then you can't see it from here, but what we actually did was put some of this hardware mesh on the ground at the bottom of the building. Oh, they're relaxing in the sun in here. I was going to try to show you where that mesh is under the bedding material. So right here, like this hardware mesh is under the entire building, and it's returned up into the sides and fastened in there, and where the sheets of it meet underneath the bedding, it's fastened together itself too. So that was to prevent predators from getting into the building from underneath. There's one of the beautiful black hens. That's Elvira. Thanks, Tina B. Shout out to you for naming Elvira and the one that looks just like her. And this is cool. We're just putting nesting corners in these. So it's just a corner that makes hidey holes for the hens, and they love them. So this is the second clutch of eggs out of here today.